Now, I haven't hidden it on my channel that Prue is my favorite charmed sister. And I've also made it clear that Paige is almost tied with Piper as my second favorite sister. I.e., on some days I'm like, Piper is my second favorite. On other days I go, Paige is my second favorite. I really, really do enjoy her character, the difference she brings, her personality, and the unique stories her hybrid nature brought onto the show. I thought it was novel and interesting, and I had a blast with her. But I'm also going to be the first to admit that for the longest time, after we first got introduced to Paige in season 4, and as the seasons rolled on, I just kept having the feeling and sensation that she sometimes slipped into the role of the substitute within the story. A situation that most certainly did not benefit her character in the long run because being a substitute sucks. Because as a substitute, you are basically a glorified replacement. It means that you're limited to the role you've been slotted into, i.e., you have to work within the parameters of the role you're taking over, so there is no gap in the line. Remember, the substitute is there to fill the position that is now available in a way that a break is not obvious to the people they are serving or entertaining. All of which then means that you're not really allowed the room to truly innovate or break free of said limitations, which then leads to the character feeling just a tad bit boring on occasion by virtue of, well, it's just more of the same. And I personally think that that was a core problem with the character of Paige Matthews and the way in which the writers of Charmed handled her. Let's talk about that, shall we? Now, before I start this video, I would like to remind all of you watching that this is just my opinion. You don't need to agree with me. In fact, I am perfectly fine if you don't. We are all individuals with our own minds after all, and having differing opinions speak to our diversity and how we interpret this show and these characters in different ways. And that, for me, is a part of the beauty of life. So you don't have to agree with me. But I do hope you will extend me the courtesy of hearing me out and letting me know if any of what I'm saying actually resonates or if I'm making any point at all. Of course, you are also free to disagree with me. Like I said earlier, that is the beauty of life. And with that said, let's get on with the rest of the video. Now, for me, when I say I think of Paige as a substitute, I am looking at it from the lens that, one, she's brought on to fill the gap/hole left as a result of Prue dying due to Shannon leaving the show, and this is a gap that then widens to a second substitution being her role as the youngest charmed one, i.e., she's replacing Phoebe as well. And I know some of you are probably already typing out a long response about how, well, technically, Piper is the one who takes over Prue's role, so we can't really call Paige a substitute for Prue. And to that, I would say yes and no. Yes, indeed, Piper does take over Prue's role as the elder sister, but, and this is the no part, without Paige, there will still be that big vacancy left as a result of Prue not being present anymore. The sisters have to be 3 after all. That is what the prophecy demands, that the Warren line would have born into it 3 sisters who would gain the power of 3 and as we know them to be, would become the charmed ones. Paige's introduction to the family literally fills in the role left open by Prue, thus fulfilling the prophecy again. Plus, I personally don't think it's a coincidence that the writers took it a step further to give her powers that, although are hers and make sense to her law of being half witch and half white lighter, bear quite the similarity to Prue's. They both have telekinesis, which is yet another power that is passed down through the Warren line. And sure, Paige's telekinesis is channeled through her orbing abilities, but it is still rooted in her ability to move objects using thought. And I do not think it's a coincidence either that the show has her move into Prue's room when she finally agrees to join her sisters in living at the manor. And I know some of you might think, well, Prue's room was the only available one. You're reading too much into this, Noria, and maybe I am. But I do think that the show, having Paige take control of Prue's room and then slowly over the course of its seasons have her transform the room to be less Prue's room and more Paige's room, was done to subtly show Paige settling into this role that she took over, to the point that it is less focused on the person she's replacing and more about her bringing her own spin to the charmed one's life and to the show itself, which I personally approve of. It was a very nice touch. Plus, of the other three sisters, she's the one most like Prue with regards her stubbornness, her unwillingness to budge when she knows she's in the right, her judgmental nature, especially when it pertains to matters that concern Phoebe's relationships, kind of like how Prue was the one that was instinctively distrustful of Cole and only slowly started to warm up to him after his true self had been revealed, and it made it clear that he was on a path to redemption. And how she prioritizes their role and responsibilities as the charmed ones, i.e. that they are meant to protect and offer aid to the innocent, even when her sisters would rather do otherwise. Kind of like Prue. And then there's the fact that she unquestionably exists to fill Phoebe's former role within the family as the youngest Halliwell sister, now that Piper's the eldest and Phoebe's become the middle child. And being the youngest sibling brings with it the expectations of the role that the youngest is meant to fulfill. She's the rebellious one, the most free-spirited, the one who's most interested in magic and eager to learn all about these cool new powers and abilities that she's now inherited by virtue of her being reunited with her family. The missteps that come with that, i.e. having to learn the hard way not to use her powers for personal gain, you get the drift. And I'm sure you're confused about why I've just spent the last 5 minutes basically repeating all of what you already know. I did so because it bears repeating. Because that is unfortunately what happens when a character is brought on to play the role of a substitute in the lives of an already established system. They tend to regurgitate the talking points that we as the audience have already spent the previous seasons before they came on board navigating. And what we are then left with is this feeling of eventual boredom, because what it seems like is that the story, and by extension the character, is merely treading water at this point. Paige's wide-eyed innocence and delight at discovering magic and all it entails is something that we had already previously experienced in the previous season. What we basically got in season 4 was a reenactment of what the girls had gone through in season 1. But this time around, instead of it happening with the three of them, specifically the youngest, it is just Paige, because, say with me, she is a substitute. Please consider this. If they didn't absolutely need her to take over Phoebe's role as the ingenue, just learning and excited about things, imagine if, say, Paige had been, a middle child. Now stay with me. We can work with this in whatever ways possible. Maybe Patty and Victor had a brief moment of separation after she'd had Piper, where she got closer to and had a brief relationship with Sam Wilder, and all the forbidden love that went with that. They separated because, forbidden love, but not before she gets pregnant with Paige, and because of said forbidden love, had to give up her daughter, and then later she gets back together with Victor and they have Phoebe. We still have Paige as a sibling that the girls have no knowledge of because she was given away, but she's a middle sister, not the last, like the story goes. And imagine if her powers hadn't been bound. Although, to be fair, we never really got confirmation of this, because the show never really explains how on earth Paige had her powers and could opt in and out of an emergency when the crash happened that led to the death of her parents, but couldn't use her powers afterwards. I mean, sure, Grams could have bound her witchy magic, but she doesn't have the ability to bind her white lighter abilities, so what happened? Now, imagine if Paige did have some understanding of magic, specifically her white lighter magic and what she's capable of, but had hidden it for most of her life until her sister showed up after Prue's death. And then everything makes sense. She's still learning, but not from ground zero the way the show had her do. And she's able to bring in maybe her own bit of witchy practice that she had been experimenting with and trying out before she realized the whole history and family that she didn't know she had. We still get an introduction, but it's different now because Paige has brought on an added layer that we as the audience get to connect with in a fresh way, in a new way that doesn't feel the same. The possibilities. Which, by the way, is a great place for me to plug in that I am working on a Charmed series of videos where I looked at the missed opportunities present for each of the sisters. And I might even go beyond them to other characters because there's so many delicious ways that the writers could have gone with and interpreted them all in a way that wouldn't have left a lot of us viewers, frustrated with how the show putted out. But anyway, back to my initial point. They didn't do that because they were clear on what role she was substituting into. Youngest sister, along with all the baggage that comes with that, and they ran with it. But because she's also meant to be a substitute for Prue, and they gave her some of Prue's traits so that Prue's fans can still have something to connect with Paige on, it brings an added layer, yeah, but it just adds to the frustration of it for me. Because the constant thing that you have in your subconscious, that your subconscious will be pointing out to you as you're watching the show is, haven't we seen this? Been here before? Paige is immediately suspicious of Cole. Where have we seen this before? Oh yeah, Prue did that. She constantly tries to pull off personal gain spells only for it to rebound and bite her in the ass. For example, her trying to reverse an instant karma that just kept making her boobs bigger, which, not gonna lie, that was kind of funny. What wasn't funny for me though was the fact that it was the same old shtick that we had already experienced, particularly with Phoebe in earlier seasons, because she was the one that was always, personal gain. And speaking of Phoebe, who acting in a capacity of the youngest meant that she never actually listened, thought her older sisters were out to cramp her style, and eventually always runs into trouble. You know who else had to fill that role? Paige, because she is the youngest now. But in a similar vein, it also means that, like Phoebe, Paige as the youngest sister is not really taken as seriously. So when she brings up suggestions or tries to warn her sisters, they are dismissive of her concerns, whether this is with regards as suspicions that Cole is the source, or in the episode Size Matters, when Paige tries warning her sisters about the demon Gamil and him shrinking people into figurines, they dismiss her. Which of course leads to Gamil being able to shrink Phoebe, and Paige and Piper have to go to save her. It is the curse of being the youngest, of not being taken seriously by those older than you until the danger is right in their faces. Which made me remember season 1, episode 1, when Phoebe kept trying to get Prue and Piper to listen to her and not believe that they are now witches and will be attacked because of it, and they dismiss her until, of course, the trouble comes calling. And of course, there's the bit in the final season where Piper is pissed at Paige for breaking her cover in order to help an innocent. And it was just yet another recreation of the older sister being ideologically at loggerheads with the youngest sister. And I don't know about you, but at some point it gets really tiresome because it's once again Prue and Phoebe, but this time around it's Paige and Piper. That for me was a core problem with Charmed, especially the latter seasons. That there was needless repetition of points and circumstances and situations that had already been previously handled. And yet they kept trotting them back out, especially when it came to do with Paige. Which I personally think was unfair to her because, like I said, her lore is amazing. Our introduction was so good. The circumstances within which her story operated could have been her own. But they didn't. Hell, they even had her have a tumultuous relationship with her father like Prue did with Victor, and it just... When I did a rewatch recently, I kept asking, can anything just be Paige's? Like, for real? Even Wyatt got her powers, and I'm just like... Now, why does it seem like she's serving as a stand-in of the witch and white lighter progeny, like she's heralding the introduction of Wyatt, who is also a witch and white lighter progeny? Personally, I'm of the opinion that the writers and showrunners realized the magic they had with the earlier seasons of Charmed and how the sister dynamic worked, and they were desperate to recreate it after Shannon left and wanted to do so in a way where the audience wouldn't feel the gap, and pushed Paige into filling this gap in a way that made her less of her own person and more a replacement that just existed in order to keep the magic formula going. But maybe that's just me. Maybe your opinions and thoughts are different. Please let me know by dropping them in the comments. Like this video if you've watched this far and haven't done so yet. Share this if you want. Support me on Patreon if you can. And until Monday's video, do remember, obsessing over the things you love, perfectly valid coping mechanism.